This guide is for those looking to try their first dropship flight. It will help you get into and out of the air safely. It's the first in a series on dropship piloting, so we're going to start slowly with the basics of flight, learning how each button and thumbstick movement affects the ship. We'll slowly build up from using a single button to fly to combining all the controls to maintain flight. You'll be tempted to try all the controls at once, which may work for some, but for most leads to burning wreckage. So I urge you to be patient and follow the steps. You'll be air support for 3 tank convoys in no time. Before we get started, make sure you've gone into your options and set your vertical flight to standard, as I'm showing in this small clip here. It's a much more intuitive way to fly a dropship. Skill points, fittings and asset requests are not part of this guide. I'll assume here that you know how to call in a dropship and how to get into it. Start with the ship on level ground. Let's take off and land. Hold L1 down, but don't touch the sticks. Go up until you get to a decent height. Let go, and you'll see that you just hover. Press L2 to reduce thrust, and you'll come down and land. Just before you hit the ground, briefly add some thrust to slow your momentum. If you don't add a bit of upthrust just before you hit the ground to soften the landing, you'll hit hard like this, which is dangerous because it can reduce your shields, sometimes to nothing. You bounce, so you can bounce into nearby objects and destroy your ship, and you can even crush your teammates this way. So learn to put it down gently. If this happened when you took off, it's because you pulled back on the left stick rather than just using thrust. This mistake is quite common. As you see, it's easy to backflip this way and you can lose your ship. So don't try and right it yourself, as it's often not possible. Just hop out and recall your vehicle quickly and you shouldn't lose it. Walk away slowly as if that's what you intended to do all along. If you are parked on a slope and you take off using only the thrust button, it'll have the same effect as when you take off with no thrust and pulling back on the left stick. The ship will roll over onto its back. That's if you don't correct it, which I do here by pushing the stick forward and then as the ship levels off, pressing the thrust button until we stop. See how I land much further back from my takeoff point when I took off with the ship on a slope. I'm not using either of the sticks in any of the takeoff or landings you've seen so far. I'm only using L1 and L2, thrust on or thrust off. Now let's add the use of a single stick and a single plane of movement. We'll look now at the right stick, left and right movement only, and add that to the thrust controls. Start by landing your ship in a clear spot. Take off as usual and release thrust when you get to a decent height. Without touching any other controls, move the right stick to the right, then left, then right. Notice that we're not losing any height. The nose is turning to point left or right, but that's all. Now down thrust with L2 to lose a little height, then yaw again, and then land. See that we're in almost exactly the spot we took off from. We are only changing the direction we are facing, not actually going anywhere when we use the right stick. Practice that again. Just go up, your left, then your right, then land again. Now that we can take off, look around and then land safely, we can start to look at flying away from our takeoff point and landing in another spot. We have used the thrust buttons, the right stick, left and right, in green on the diagram, so far. Now let's add the left stick, but only forwards and backwards. That's the yellow on the diagram. We'll get to the red arrows at a later time. Fly to a decent height, then release the thrust button, but be ready to press it soon or you'll crash. Now push forward on the left stick. See how the ship moves forward but at the same time loses height. Before you crash, pull back sharply on the left stick. When you are level, apply full thrust but keep pulling back on the left stick. You'll end up with your nose pointed in the air. See how your speed reduces quickly. When you stop forward motion, press the left stick forward again, at the same time releasing the thrust to bring your nose down. This should bring you to a complete stop. I'll repeat that section for you so you can watch it again. While we did go forward, that was really a dive. Let's look at how to move forward without losing height. This time push forward on the left stick a little, while also applying some thrust. The balance here will come from experience. More thrust for more pitch. Feather the thrust if you need to maintain a constant height. When you want to stop, it's just like before. Release thrust, pull back on the left stick till the speed is gone, then forward with the left stick to level off. A couple of bursts on thrust if you need to put a bit of height back. I turned around using the right stick, so I can head back. But I overshoot my target. Rather than turning round, I can go backwards by pulling back on the left stick. Just like forward, if I don't use thrust, I lose height. It's the same procedure to stop as we just did with forward, only the controls are reversed. Let's do that again, but I'll tip further backwards into a steeper rear dive this time, so you can see how easily this can go wrong. I'll try again, but this time I'll use the thrust, just like when moving forwards, to maintain my height as I go backwards. I use a turn stop to lose speed, something I'll cover another time. Practice going forward until you can maintain your altitude as you do so. Then when you're comfortable, practice doing the same going backwards. When you can do these maneuvers successfully every time, move on to the next set, which is adding roll to flight. That's the left and right movement with the left stick. Adding the final flight control will give you real maneuverability, but at the same time it complicates flight. Repeat the steps we've done so far before you move on to adding roll to your flight maneuvers. Let's look at the final movement type, roll. On its own, rolling the ship has some use, but its real strength comes from combining it with the other movement types we've covered in this video so far. While I talk about roll, watch as I demonstrate the result of combining yaw, pitch, thrust and roll. So the last stick action that controls the ship is left and right with the left stick. Forward and back with the right stick simply moves the pilot view camera, which I'll cover last. Moving the left stick either left or right will cause the dropship to tip or roll left or right. Let's look at what happens when I roll left. First, using a thrust-only takeoff, get to a decent height and release thrust. Now using no other controls, push the left stick left. As you can see, the ship rolls onto its side quite violently, but the nose stays pointing in the same direction, and the ship does also not move forwards or backwards. As I unfreeze the video, notice how I'm moving quickly left and down even though I'm not pressing thrust at all. Had I not hit thrust and rolled right to compensate, I would have crashed. The same happens when I roll right with no thrust. The ship tips and loses height while it moves sideways at high speed. So what happens if we roll and apply thrust? The ship slides sideways and the nose swings round. See how I'm able to maintain height and turn the ship to face left while gaining speed at the same time. You can use thrust and roll to turn without losing too much speed. Notice, however, that the turn is not very tight. It's more of a lazy sweep right. I can turn all the way round to face behind me using just these two controls. Notice that unlike yaw, the ship is changing position and the guns are facing the ground, and I'm gaining speed. By adding yaw to roll, we can tighten the turn considerably. Turn both sticks hard to the right. Apply thrust and roll the left stick down to the backwards position when you're 3/4 of a way through the turn. Push the left stick fully forward when you're lined up with the direction you want to go, and at the same time, right stick to neutral. Keep flying in these tight loops to practice using both sticks at the same time and using your throttle to balance your altitude and your direction. There is much more to flying dropships, but we've covered enough basic skills for you to be able to fly around the map safely. So practice your takeoffs, roll turns, yaw and roll combined to be able to fly where you want without crashing on the way. The next video will cover how to combine these basic maneuvers with each other and with the camera to perform more complex combat and recon tasks.